Is fatigue an issue that you've been trying to figure out and your doctor has been trying to figure out? You believe it's coming from your thyroid, but all your blood tests are normal? Well, then this conversation is for you. I speak with McCall McPherson, the founder of Modern Thyroid Clinic. McCall McPherson is a physician assistant, and she's a recent TEDx speaker and a thyroid expert. Her passion for perfecting the thyroid treatment stemmed from her years of suffering due to mismanagement of her own hypothyroidism. And this is something you get to see as a woman. Almost, if you 8 out of 10 women have thyroid issues, and some now men are also getting to have thyroid issues, and we don't know why there's an increase in thyroid issues, but this conversation will give you some insight into the why and how and what. So if you're struggling with fatigue and can't seem to get anywhere finding a physician who will actually help you with this conversation will help you ask the right questions. I'm Dr. Chalam, your host for this podcast, Women Wired for Wellness. And without any further delay, I want you to listen to this conversation. But before you do that, make sure you share this link, download it from iTunes, and make sure you like our YouTube channel. Once again, I'm Dr. Chalam, your host for Women Wired for Wellness and the founder of Holistic and Integrative Center of Novi. Looking forward to listening to your feedback after you listen to this conversation. Take care. I am Dr. Chalam, your host for this online summit, Resolving Fatigue Naturally. Today is a very interesting topic for a lot of reasons. Most women come to us with fatigue. They always want their thyroid checked. And it's not always their thyroid, but this particular conversation is going to be centered around how do you address fatigue and how is it connected to the thyroid, or is it connected to the thyroid? And for this, I have a very interesting speaker, and she's really very well accomplished in the world of thyroid. In fact, is Thyroid Nation, and we'll get into it. McCall McPherson is the founder of Modern Thyroid Clinic, a thyroid-centered functional medical practice in Austin, Texas, and now the owner and chief thyroid hope giver, that's the best title I've ever seen, of Thyroid Nation. She's a physician assistant, a recent TEDx speaker, and a thyroid expert by way of being a thyroid patient herself. Her passion for perfecting thyroid treatment stemmed from her years of suffering from the mismanagement of her own hypothyroidism. She now lives, breathes, and thrives in understanding the nuances of proper thyroid care. Her philosophy is very simple. There is no reason for anyone to struggle with thyroid symptoms. She spends her time helping her patients get their lives back and also teaching other people who are not her patients figure out how to overcome their suffering and actually take control of their life and health. Welcome, McCall. Thank you so much for actually doing this for us.
Thank you for having me. I could not be more excited about the message that you're spreading.
Thank you. So one of the biggest things that caught me about your bio is where you said for years you struggled. You're a physician assistant. Were you a physician assistant when you were diagnosed with hypothyroidism?
I wasn't when I was diagnosed, but I was when I was in my thyroid crisis, and I was going to bed at 3:30 in the afternoon every day.
Okay, very good. So let me understand, your story is probably going to be very similar to a lot of us who struggle. I've had Hashimoto's, which is how I got into functional medicine. Let me understand, what did you actually experience, and why do you think your thyroid was mismanaged?
Yes, so I was 27, had hypothyroidism for years, was on Synthroid, and I was okay. I was, wandering along, sometimes still fatigued, but doing really largely okay. Graduated PA school, was in what I thought was my dream job, and completely crashed and burned. I would go to work every morning at 6:30. I would come home at 2:45, and literally by 3:30 in the afternoon every day, I was in my pajamas in bed as a 27-year-old woman. Weekends were literally spent not leaving my house. So I was so tired, so brain fogged, so fatigued, depressed, 15 pounds overweight, that I was either working or recovering from work or resting enough to go to work the next day. And that was my life for almost a year. During that year, I would go to my doctor and I would beg him for help. And he essentially would say, you know, your TSH looks fine. Back then, there were not really a lot of thyroid advocacy platforms. There wasn't Thyroid Nation. There was Stop the Thyroid Madness. Luckily, I somehow ran across enough information, even as a person licensed by the medical board, to see, hey, maybe I need to look at more information. So I went to my doctor, like probably many of you listening, with a little Post-it note and said, hey, would you please run my TSH, my free T4, my free T3, and my reverse T3? And he looked at me and said, you know, I don't really know about this. I'll go research it and I'll get back to you. You know, came back and he said, no, I'm only going to run your TSH. I'm not going to run anything else because science tells me that TSH is the only important thing. And so luckily at that point, I parted ways with him and ended up on the wait list of one of the only integrative medicine doctors in Austin back then. Waited months to see him, saw him. He was very well versed in thyroid, and I got my life back. Now that's what I get to do every day, all day. That man became a mentor to me very, very quickly. And years later, now that's my job.
It's wonderful. So basically, this is a story that most of us hear, right? You have symptoms and you go to a traditional medical doctor. And I tell this to people, don't blame your doctor because that's their training. You
Right.
can go to a cardiologist and ask them about your joint pains because that's
Right.
what he's versed in. So, and why are there two tracks of medicine? Why is there a regular medicine and an integrative medicine or a functional medicine, whatever you want to call it? They are a little different. We can get into that. But what you have to understand is disease in the past used to be catastrophic events like a heart attack or a stroke. And right now we're having
Slowly dying.
Exactly. We're not dying that quickly, but we're getting that path slowly, and each system, each organ fails. And so what has happened is medicine, instead of becoming, I always call the traditional medical care as the non-urgent, urgent care of medicine, right? That's all they have.
I like that.
Yeah, 15 minutes, you're not dying, but in that 15 minutes, all they can do is give you a name and connect you to a drug. And then you're going there and trying to ask them to do something beyond what they have learned. So
Right.
it becomes something like not necessary, not needed. And again, most physicians work in systems. So what would you tell for a person who's really struggling? And I find that now my younger doctors, since I do a lot of medical school students training, they are a little more open to have this dialogue with patients. What would you say the conversation should go like, and why do you think you failed to convince your initial doctor? Was it something that you could have done a little differently? Have you ever thought back?
Well, that is I like that perspective of, you know, not blaming the clinician and taking responsibility and ownership yourself. You know, I think part of it is trying to go into it with a non-combative, open dialogue, you know, of like, really, I need help. This is what I've seen. This is what I've read. This is what I've researched. Would you help me? Would you order these labs for me? And then part B of that is, you know, also taking ownership in that if you have a doctor and you have a suspected thyroid problem, if you have symptoms, what I tell people when I lecture is if you have, you know, symptoms of hypothyroidism, fatigue, brain fog, dry skin, brittle nails, brittle hair, weight gain, depression, weight retention, elevated blood sugar, elevated cholesterol, constipation, if you have, you know, 70% of those, and your doctor tells you you don't have hypothyroidism, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. You know, so part B of that conversation is you're going to have to take ownership and you're going to have to exit that part of the, professional relationship and find someone else to try and help you. It can't be an unending dialogue back and forth. I went to that doctor for me for probably 8 months, trying to get him to help me to engage, to get on my, on my bandwagon. And I could have went there for 8 years.
Correct.
And he never would have helped me. Not that he would have resisted. If he had the tools, maybe. But if he checked my TSH and my T4 and my T3 and reverse T3, what would he have done with that information?
Exactly.
He would not have had any clue what to do with that. So, part of it is exiting and moving on and trying to find someone else that could potentially help you.
So when you look at today's the terrain as far as women go, what has been, since you really run Thyroid Nation, and I'm sure lots and lots of people, not only women, men too, though 9 out of 10 are usually women who struggle with thyroid issues. What has been your perspective as far as how fast is this problem increasing, number one, number two, and why do you think that's happening?
Yeah. So it really is my belief, and it's a big statement, but if things keep going as they're going, if you're a woman and you're a woman with children,
yes,
it is almost not a matter of if, but when. Mm-hmm. If you have proper diagnostic criteria, ultimately it is very, very likely that you are going to end up with some level of hypothyroidism. It's just inevitable almost at this point. And I think, there are things that we know that cause it, like Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is the autoimmune condition associated with hypothyroidism that's largely driven by inflammation.
Correct.
Right? Functional medicine views Hashimoto's not like regular medicine. We don't believe it's like the reverse lottery, that it just shows up randomly and it's like, all right, you win. We think that it shows up, and I know that it shows up after prolonged inflammatory conditions. So that's things like poor diet, poor lifestyle, high stress, environmental toxins, that kind of thing. But it's interesting. In my practice in Austin, Texas, people here have an extraordinarily healthy lifestyle. Mm-hmm. About 80% of my patients here do not have Hashi, but they still have hypothyroidism. And so I think that speaks to, sure, Hashi also causes it, but there's something in our environment that is also creating slow degradation of our thyroid over time. Correct. Just loss of function. And I describe it kind of like vitamin D. We're all vitamin D deficient. P.S. If you guys aren't taking vitamin D, start taking vitamin D.
Yes.
This is not medical advice, but most likely you're vitamin D deficient. Talk to your doctor. But it's inevitable almost. It's such a strange thing, but it really, get tested, get checked, because it really is a problem for women, especially if you're fatigued and you're listening to this.
Right. So there is something that is causing our thyroid to fail much earlier. Like when I went to medical school, most of the times hypothyroidism presented in my very elderly patients. Yeah. And a lot of them had fatigue, and we would be told not to treat them unless the TSH was obnoxiously high, right? Yeah. And but right now we're seeing fatigue from our 35-year-olds, and I think these are some important points that you brought up. If you're a woman who's had children, and there are studies that show that by the time you have 2 pregnancies, definitely with every pregnancy, there's a degree of thyroiditis. So as much as pregnancy is considered a physiological state, it's also a physiological stress. Mm-hmm. And it does create some degree of immune, immune stress, basically. Mm-hmm. And there's thyroiditis, and by the time you have your 3rd child, the chances are a portion of your thyroid is chronically inflamed. And many times you'll find, even after your pregnancy, when they do blood tests, and this is something that happened to me too, they did my thyroid test because I was complaining of this fatigue. And, of course, they look for hemoglobin, make sure you're not anemic, you just had a baby, and continue your prenatal vitamins. My TSH was 9.48, and when you look at normal TSH is 1 to 3.5, and we didn't do anything about it because they said it'll get better. And of course, a year later, it was 2.45, and they said, see, it got better.
And you're like, I'm barely functioning.
Right, right. And then, I had that 2 o'clock fatigue, and you really want to, I got into the habit of dealing with my fatigue by drinking caffeine and telling people I just love coffee. That's why I love to drink coffee. But it was the only way I could function. So how do women who struggle with this and have fatigue and the TSH is normal, what would you tell them are the next steps besides going and researching, finding a doctor who'll do the whole gamut? Let's say, and I think and I know of people who come in with normal TSH and normal T4, T3 and have no antibodies, but they have all the symptoms of thyroid dysfunction. Where do they go from there?
And we're using quotes with normal?
Yeah.
Can I get a little bit scientific?
Yes.
For a second.
Let's do the normal and what is normal and what is normal.
Right. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So, this is largely probably one of the top 3 reasons why I have a thyroid practice, right? Regular medicine teaches us as clinicians to essentially, when we are interpreting lab data, we get the lab data, we look at the sheet of paper, and we see if it's in bold or if it's off to the side.
Yes.
And if it's in bold or off to the side, it's not normal. It's out of range. And then if the person's TSH is out of range and in bold, then they have a thyroid problem. If it's not, then they're normal, right? There's a few inherent problems with that. We assume as clinicians, and patients assume, that there is a set standard that labs are going by for our TSH, our T4, our T3, or reverse T3, right? Unfortunately, that is not the case. And in fact, even between the same lab and different locations, there are variations in what's acceptable. So, a Quest lab close to my office is different than a Quest lab 10 minutes down the road, is different than a LabCorp than a hospital, right? So every time a doctor looks at a patient's lab, it depends what the lab says is normal if the patient is determined hypothyroid or not. Mm-hmm. So that's one problem. The second problem is that lab is determining their ranges based on formulating averages from their patient population. So I want you to imagine this. If they're taking averages of people's TSH, they are not excluding people with hypothyroidism when they're formulating them.
Right.
So they're including people with the diagnosis they're trying to rule out when they establish an optimal range, which statistically speaking is not okay, right? So someone with a TSH of 57 who's been in a severe hypothyroid state can be averaged in with someone whose TSH is 0 who's hyperthyroid. What does that do to our quote normal range? It makes it way too darn wide. And what does that do to our people? It allows our people to stay sick and debilitated with fatigue and brain fog and weight gain while still in normal ranges. One last thing is, who is going to get labs to get their labs drawn? Healthy people just going to check in and get their labs drawn all the time? No, sick people, right? So now we're formulating averages based on sick people. And so all of those things take into account, our set standard is very skewed. It's very, very skewed. So no longer can we depend on whatever the lab says is normal as our normal. So when I first started my niche in thyroid years ago, I based my normal or optimal ranges on a subset of research that excluded people with hypothyroidism when they determined their range. It excluded people with family history and symptoms, which makes sense, right?
Yeah. You want to get really normal people.
Right. You want to get people without the condition and that are healthy and have a lot of vitality and energy. So that's where I started. That was my starting point. Now, because I have such a high percentage of patients with hypothyroidism, I'm constantly collecting data. Because of that, I'm able to see where people get their lives back. So about every 18 months, I take those points and I make them more narrow. So now I've landed at ranges that are this wide, right? And if I can get everybody into ranges this wide with their labs, boom, they're not hypothyroid in terms of their symptoms anymore.
Yes.
And that's what I say is normal or close to normal, is highly optimal. So, if you're getting your labs and they're normal, I'll tell you this much right out of the gate is, two things with your TSH that are important. One is, labs will say that you can go up to 5 sometimes. It should always be below 2, ideally closer to 1. Okay, if you're above 2, pretty much you're symptomatic, 98% of the time. Second, and this is such an important thing, and it's very complicated, so I won't go into the biochemistry of it all, but if you are on levothyroxine, Synthroid, or Unithroid, your TSH can no longer be a reliable marker to determine your thyroid function. And I'm going to say this, the worse you are at using your medication, if you're on one of those medications, the better your labs look because of the way that your thyroid biochemistry looks or works. So again, the worse you are at using your medication, so essentially the worse you feel, the better your biochemistry will look and the more prone your doctor is to saying, your labs look great.
Yes.
And it's a shame for people who are getting their TSH and their T4, because both of those things will look amazing if you're a terrible activator of your medication.
Correct. And this is a problem with, I think people who go to the doctor have no idea what TSH is, what a T4 is. TSH is not even produced by the thyroid. It's produced by the brain that signifies, hey, I have enough of the thyroid in the blood, so you don't have to produce anything more. But again, like you said, when you're giving something artificially, this is another one that is very important for patients to understand. When we give a medication, we're giving a fixed dose of a hormone. Whereas if your thyroid were working on its own, it will go high and low based on your needs, just like how insulin goes high and low based on the needs of your blood sugars. But when we give a fixed dose, there are going to be days when you're going to feel crappy, when your stress is more, and there are other days you're going to feel fabulous. But if your bad days are far more than your good days, it is something that needs to be revisited. And a lot of times people don't know. They say, I feel they come to an annual physical exam. They tell their doctor, I take my thyroid, I think I feel okay. That's another one. What is an okay feeling and what is a normal feeling? You said, I was okay, and you put up with it till you realized you were not living life. So what is not okay about the okay?
Let me tell you, and I'll use the ladies that come to my office as a classic example in the stories that I hear. So women historically and now, we push through. So we are push through people. So it is extremely common for me to hear the verbatim story of, well, I was pregnant, and so I thought that's why I was tired, and then I had just had my baby, and so I figured I was tired because of that, and then I was breastfeeding, and so I figured it was that, and then I had another baby, and then, then breastfeeding, I had 2 kids, they were in elementary school, and then, I figured I was tired because they were in high school. Well, now all my children are graduating college, and I'm still tired, so I figured maybe something's wrong, it is not okay to wait that long and feel that terrible for 25 years, And an objective measurement that I tell my patients is, on a scale of 1 to 10 of energy, vitality, sense of well-being, my goal for my ladies that come to see me is if a 10 is unattainably perfect, my goal is to get them to an 8 or an 8.5. The difference between an 8 and a 10 is a perfect lifestyle 100% of the time, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
So we hang at an 8, but that's what you should be looking for. You should not be napping in the afternoon, right? You should not be crashing at 3 p.m. when it's time to go pick up your kids from school, right? And you should want to have fun with your family and your friends after work at 5 p.m. You should not be in your pajamas.
Yep. And weekends should not be you laying in bed till noon to catch up.
No, right. Yeah, that's not okay. And I was 27. I would have gone the rest of my life like that, I think.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's very important. It's exactly the story we hear across the country, right? Women, in fact, I would say when a woman comes to my office, is in the waiting room with 2 of her kids, I know I cannot help her because she has in her own mind determined the real cause of fatigue, and she doesn't realize Why isn't my doctor telling me this? And I'm hoping this conversation helps you understand why your doctor doesn't think you have a problem, why you think you don't think you have a problem that requires an intervention. And this is because we convince ourselves that it is normal to feel fatigue. It's normal to be tired when you have worked like 48 hours in a row, but it's not normal to be fatigued on a day-to-day basis just because it's the end of the day.
Right.
Right.
And then the other thing that I see women doing, and I see this pervasively by the time they come to me, and I'm not exaggerating when I say, so women come to me, we order their labs, they come back to review their labs, and 100, pretty much, I mean, maybe 98%, but at least 95%, not exaggerating. Verbatim at that second appointment, when we review their labs, they look at me and they say, so you're telling me I'm not crazy, or so you're telling me it's not in my head, right? So it's either they've accustomed themselves to being tired, or they actually think that it's in their head, that it's not real. And I think part of that is, in some ways, doctors' faults of years of telling them, hey, no, this is diet, this is lifestyle, this is your fault, right? You've done this to yourself, you need to fix yourself. When in reality, it's purely biochemical, a large portion of it, right? But yeah, I mean, they accept responsibility and they think it's in their head and that they're crazy. And that literally almost brings me to tears at least 3 or 4 times a week. It's just terrible that we do that to ourselves.
Absolutely. It's actually very sad that you can have somebody else convince you that what you feel is not something true. It's just that you're making it all up because of stress. I would agree that stress to some degree gets you mentally fatigued, but we all know the difference between that kind of fatigue. You're feeling stressed and run down because something is going on in your life.
Yeah.
And that's very different from what we're talking about, where you every day physically you feel drained. You go to bed, you wake up feeling drained. That is not normal. Are there any other symptoms that they need to look out for, saying, you know what, even though my thyroid tests are normal, I don't think this is normal? Is there something that you notice that repeatedly people put up with it for years?
Let's see. Hair loss is like an objective sign.
Yeah.
Like that is an objective one.
One of the things I notice, I don't know if you see this, I see allergies, especially nasal congestion. They would be stuffed all the time. And when you fix their thyroid, it's completely have no allergies. And the second one is chronic migraine headaches.
Really?
Yeah.
Migraines. I see headaches, but less migraines.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You got chronic migraine headaches where they feel the nausea, or the intensity of the migraine headaches gets worse as they get to gain some more weight. And a lot of times they just put up with it because they believe they've been diagnosed with migraine headaches, and it's something that they just have to live with. And the nasal congestion is one thing that really tips me off. And it proceeds years before they get thyroid issues.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Do you find it most correlates with Hashi or pure hypothyroidism?
Hashimoto's.
For sure. Yeah.
It's always with Hashimoto's, because Hashimoto's is an inflammatory state, and you'll find that the body tries to warn you years before. And this is something that I did for myself, having eczema as a child, having, I used to call it the vasomotor rhinitis, because it made me cold 7 months of the year, and I thought that's the only reason why I had a stuffy nose. But the minute I addressed my Hashi, which took me, a couple of years, but the minute I got it addressed, I've not touched a Flonase. This was part of my life. I know that, and now when women come to me saying, they just have allergies and they come seasonally, every time, either winter or spring or summer, I just know that they have an inflammatory process and they need to take care of it. However, it's the hardest thing to convince people, because I remember when I was having those allergies, I was a resident, I was an intern, I had to go through my, research projects. I didn't have time to think that I had other things till it brought me down. So looking for other symptoms which are too chronic, despite medications, they don't get better, that they keep coming back. You need to look for a root cause of what is driving up this inflammation. So in terms of having, like people having these symptoms, they have a diagnosis. What are the things that they can do besides medication? Medications is one part of it. That's what the provider or the physician or whomever they go to has to take care of. What are the things that they can do on their own to get their energy levels up? Are there something that you feel like, hey, these are the things, if you do it, it's going to really work?
Yes. So, there is a key step there's two kind of major pathways of thyroid function influenced by lifestyle. One is building on exactly what you were talking about, Hashimoto's. So Hashimoto's is the autoimmune condition driven by inflammation. So literally what part of my work, half of the work I do with my thyroid patients with Hashi is trying to get their Hashimoto's into remission or their antibodies reduced, right?
Yes.
So that is working towards lowering inflammation in the body. There's various ways that you can influence that, but the easiest, most impactful way is food, right? Food is the choice that we make every day to make inflammation or decrease it. And after testing thousands and thousands of Hashimoto's patients, inflammatory food panels to specifically tell them, hey, these are the foods that are creating inflammation in you as a human. There's patterns that I see. And, if I were to tell people to make it simple for them, the number one food that I see that drives Hashi is dairy. Just below that is gluten. Mm-hmm. So if you have Hashi, if you've shown positive for antibodies for Hashimoto's, I'd say number one is go dairy. And then if you have more capacity to do more, go gluten-free. So that's kind of an inflammatory, area that you can influence. Another thing that I have my Hashimoto's people do that you might do as well is I have them use glutathione. So glutathione is a very, very potent anti-inflammatory antioxidant that we actually make intrinsically ourselves. Usually when people have autoimmune disease, it correlates with low glutathione reserves. So I actually have people buy glutathione. Zymogen makes a great one. Yes. It's a cream, and I have them put it directly on their thyroid gland twice a day. So that's another cool lifestyle modification. And then outside of the Hashimoto's component, there are key things you can do for thyroid function. So I want to get into a tiny, tiny bit of biochemistry. I'll go super light. But basically a large portion of the population do not do well on Synthroid or levothyroxine. They don't get well on those medications, or they just have chronically, low thyroid function because they don't activate their hormones well. They are what I call poor converters. Correct. So there is a crude oil hormone and a gasoline hormone for your thyroid. Unfortunately, the medications pretty much every doctor uses in the conventional world is a crude oil hormone medication. It is dependent on your ability to make it into gasoline so you can put it in your car and go somewhere, right? We can't put crude oil in our car. We need it to make gasoline to put in our car and go somewhere. So you've got to be able to convert that. And your body wants you to be in a low physiologically stressed state to convert it. If it isn't, if it's micronutrient depleted, there are micronutrients needed in that step. If it's stressed, if you're not sleeping, if you're, again, inflamed, right? If you're sick, if you're pregnant, if you're calorically restricted, if you're protein deficient, it sequesters that crude oil hormone and it doesn't allow it to be turned into gasoline. And I can tell you, you can have all the crude oil in the world, but if you can't make it into gasoline, you can't go anywhere in your car, right? So, if you can influence those mechanisms with a very simple, thyroid supplement that covers A to Z of all the micronutrients your thyroid needs, right? Get adequate sleep, meditate. Meditation is huge in lowering the physiological stress response, allowing your body to repair, allowing your hormones to be activated, getting enough calories, getting enough micronutrients from food, from low inflammatory food, decreasing your inflammation. All of those things that you do will allow you to take your Synthroid or your levothyroxine or your natural endogenous T4 and activate it and make it into the thing that gets rid of, fatigue and brain fog and weight gain and depression and all of those symptoms we've mentioned before.
Right, right. And I think those are very important points, again, to simplify it, though you made it very, very simple. It's basically you have a check and you cannot cash it. It has to get cashed. The biggest bank it gets cashed in, a good couple of banks. One is your gut, one is your liver. And if there's a lot of inflammation going on there, or if you have this dairy products, especially if you have Hashimoto's or gluten, and these two organs are busy doing other things, they don't have time to cash this check, and you never get that cash out, and you can never buy your energy. And that's what really happens. So a lot of times, even though you're taking these medicines and having the symptoms, look at why this check cannot be cashed. What does the teller actually need? Does it need an ID card, which would be your micronutrients? Does it need something else? And why do you have a lack of these? It could be a digestive problem. It could be your nutrition, like those people with thyroid. This is one of the things that you will find, especially if they have a low functioning thyroid. All their life, they struggle to lose weight. Yeah. So they're constantly doing different diets, sometimes very restrictive diets, which really depletes them of the nutrients. That's how you get to be micronutrient deficient, besides the fact you don't have a great digestive system. So you have to look at it, and that's why it's not as simple as when people show up in my office and say, I want WP thyroid, or Nature Thyroid, or Arma thyroid. None of those will actually make a difference, big difference, if your whole system is still inflamed and not doing its job to create that absorption of micronutrients, or the conversion. Even though these other natural thyroids have the activated portion of it, I still find it's very, very difficult to manage if that's the only thing that you're doing. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, your body is not activating those hormones for no reason, right? It is sequestering those. It is not allowing them to be active on purpose. It actually is wanting you to be tired, to rest, lay down and recover and go to bed at 3:30 in the afternoon, because it needs you to go into recovery mode. It needs you to hold on to your micronutrients if you're not taking any in. So it's going to slow your metabolism and make you hold on to your weight. It's going to make your thyroid function slow down, so you can't lose weight because you're not ingesting micronutrients. So all of these things are purposeful. So, you've got to give your body what it needs in order to get back what you want, right?
Correct. And I think that's, again, a very important point. I tell this to people all the time. Your weight gain is simply a symptom of you losing your health. It's a protective mechanism. It's not that your body is dysfunctioning. It's functioning for you to protect you. What you need to find out is, what is it protecting you against?
I like that.
Yeah, and once you get to that part of it, automatically, they always say, so will my weight go? Will my weight go? It's like, let's figure out why you are gathering that weight. And I think that's a very crucial step. And hormones don't dysfunction. We have a dysfunction from the hormones functioning to protect you from something else that can be catastrophic if they didn't do that. If the thyroid didn't slow down, did not burn your resources, like protect you from burning all of your resources, you probably would be down 6 feet under. And that's what it does with all the stress that you are experiencing at that particular moment in time. So I think that's a very important point for people to understand. The body is doing it with purpose. Find out what is the purpose, and see if you can actually help the body feel comfortable, and then it lets go of all of the resources, needless resources that you might think it's holding on to. Correct?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So what else would you say that women need to look out for? I have women who are low in thyroid. They don't have any symptoms. They are runners or they're yoga teachers. But they have this underlying where they know something is not right. It's not even a depression. It's like an apathy. Mm-hmm. That's the only symptom that they would have, because otherwise they are eating healthy, they're exercising, they're doing yoga. Is there anything else that you can say, hey, this is a tip-off that everything is not great?
Yeah, so in those types of people, what I say, especially because often those women are push through people,
Yes.
right? So it's hard to pin down if they're not really feeling as good as they could be, because they're like, I'm feeling great, I feel fine, I'm fine. So what I say for those women is test their fasting insulin and their hemoglobin A1C, so their in-depth blood sugar analysis, and their lipids. So they should look rock star because they eat so well, but commonly you'll see that they're a little elevated. They're more elevated than they should be. And in reality, what you don't want to end up doing is refusing to treat a thyroid dysfunction issue when it's really present, because you don't want to take a medication or whatever, and then ending up with something like elevated cholesterol or pre-diabetes because of really just an underlying metabolic issue due to hypothyroidism. And then you have to end up on a terrible medication when the root cause can actually be addressed and prevent that from ever happening.
Yeah, and again, that particular point about elevated cholesterol. Classically, you'll find you will go for an annual physical exam, but the LDL alone will climb. Mm-hmm. All of your other cholesterol will look like fine, under 200, your total cholesterol, your healthy cholesterol looks fine, but the LDL alone climbs a few points. Always check your thyroid. It is driven by, because it reduces the LDL receptors in the liver when you don't have the thyroid, and your LDL starts climbing because it's not getting taken into the liver. And so for those of you, all of this is foreign. LDL is your lousy cholesterol. That's what we think it is, though it's not very true. It's not like LDL is lousy or the HDL is healthy, but that's how people remember it. But you don't want it climbing without a specific reason. That's number one. Number two, most diabetics will eventually have thyroid dysfunction, and most hypothyroid patients, if they don't treat that, will eventually have what is called insulin resistance or imbalances in their blood sugar. I see this all the time. It's just a matter of which comes first. And I'm sure that's what you're bringing up too, where a lot of times there's an underlying metabolic dysfunction that nobody is addressing. Because what do we do when we do an annual physical exam? Just an fasting blood sugar, and your fasting blood sugar can be 80 one year, 86 another year, 92 another year, and before you know, one morning you wake up, you go for an annual physical exam, they say, oh, you are a diabetic, and you're like, it's always been normal.
Right.
Yeah, and those are the tests. The insulin, the A1C, which is your 90-day average, they are part and parcel of testing your thyroid function and your cholesterol. And a lot of people just come to me just for the thyroid blood test. And the thyroid does not work on its own. It integrates with other hormones, particularly cortisol, insulin, and your female hormones. So the other thing that I want you to touch base on is the younger women and older women, right? The younger women have menstrual abnormalities a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it really stems from the thyroid, not necessarily from the estrogen, progesterone, though thyroid affects the progesterone. What are the common symptoms that women tend to ignore, which is really stemming from their thyroid, and then finally get their uterus removed needlessly?
Yeah, what I usually see are symptoms. And I view it as a thyroid issue that often leads to low progesterone, that often leads to estrogen dominance, that either young women get put on birth control, mm-hmm. or older women will get their uterus removed or just hang out in misery and really be uncomfortable. But essentially, and really this is become a passion of mine, because I view it, even though I literally change people's lives every week in my office and people cry, it's wonderful, I love it, it's my passion. But what I didn't know when I went into this is how life-changing it is to help a woman with her hormones. So symptoms of estrogen dominance, which is what's really cool about it, is it can be fixed so profoundly, so quickly, which is why it is so life-changing. But they are anxiety, irritability, agitation, insomnia. And in young girls, they're getting very moody and angry and agitated. And then the other thing that's happening is they're getting very, very heavy periods, very crampy periods, dysregulated cycles. And so they're going to their OBGYN to fix this, and they're getting put on birth control to fix it. And unfortunately, when, it can be addressed from the root cause, certainly you want to fix the thyroid, which will slowly rebalance hormones. And then also you can intervene fixing the actual hormones and allow their body to reset and carry on without birth control.
Yeah. That is probably the one thing, if we can change, where we can get our OB-GYNs to work with an integrative physician or a practitioner who understands how these hormones are connected. It'll be life-changing, because along with that oral contraceptives to manage those heavy periods comes a few years later the infertility.
Yes.
And the infertility, the torture we put a woman through in terms of giving her hormone stimulation.
Yeah.
And then
and that's torture.
Yeah, that is absolute torture. And then when she crashes after that, she never gets her life back. So these are the symptoms, like if you really look at fatigue, the dry skin, weight gain, insomnia, anxiety, depression, for which you're getting a pill for every ill, and before you know, like in your 30s, you're taking about 3 different pills and you feel like, I gotta have this or I can't function. You need to find somebody who can integrate the systems,
right,
and actually get you a solution. Is there anything else that you feel like it's very important for women who struggle with fatigue to ask or to address, besides their periods, their sleep, their mood, and their weight? That would, it's something that they actually ignore but could be caught early?
I think brain fog is a big,
yes.
We tend to ignore it, but our brain is what uses the bulk of our biological energy. So it's going to be your first indicator if you're running low on your biological energy. So don't ignore it. Like, tune into that. If you can't think, then, the physiological fatigue is following. So that's a big deal, and it's not normal.
Right. And I think a lot of people have lived with brain fog so long, they think that's their norm. They feel like, I'm not capable of this. I'm not capable. We are all so capable of anything and everything that we want to do. Mm-hmm. And if something is stopping you, besides, even education doesn't matter. It's just the ability to think through and actually problem solve. And something that you were doing before, and suddenly, as something has changed, it is something that you have to seek out help. Now, in terms of what can women do right now, like listening to this, okay, I have fatigue, but my doctor has told me it's not the thyroid. They understand that there's a detailed test they can ask for. Is there anything that they are sitting at home can do right now that will shift? They can get off dairy, that I understand. They can get off gluten, which is, again, a very confusing aspect, because you don't know what gluten, the things that gluten is present in, and what different forms it is present in. So that's, again, something that I think you should really seek some help for, and not simply say I'm gluten-free. Doesn't mean you go buy gluten-free products.
No, right.
But yeah, so those are the few things. Is there anything else that they can do that can actually help shift their health at this moment?
I think what I like to tell people is realistic things that they can do in an easily accessible way, especially for moms, right? Those are my people, burnout, tired moms. Yeah. One thing that I think people can do that can be truly life-changing is, and it sounds oversimplified, and I don't think it is green juice. So you go and you get organic, I'm talking about vegetable juice, not fruit juice, vegetable juice. So you're getting this many vegetables in a cup this big, right? And so the amount of micronutrients that you are getting, if you ate even a little better than average Americans, is probably, if you did that twice a week, you're getting more micronutrients in that week than you've probably gotten in a month previously. Right. You feed your body that over the course, twice, 2, 3, 4 times a week even, the more the better, but even twice a week, start there. You do that for a month. I don't believe that someone is not going to feel a difference. And I don't believe that that is not so passive that it's not possible. You know, pretty much anybody can do that. I think that is a very powerful tool to start. I think a vitamin that has start to finish, a thyroid supplement is a very powerful tool also to start to support you. I do believe that it is so imperative that you find someone to help you get on your team to manage thyroid if it is an issue for you. I believe so much that I'm starting a training course for physicians and clinicians, because the reality is that it's complicated. You know, it's very complicated. It's extremely oversimplified in regular medicine. And I believe people's thyroid function has to be darn close to perfect for you to get your life back. So you need someone to help you do that. It costs money. What I tell people is whatever they pay me, they will get back in productivity. And I can guarantee whatever you pay whoever listeners see, they will get back in productivity. There is no cost that is not worth getting your life back, right?
Absolutely.
And it is worth it.
I really like that a quick way is to get the green juice, and you will find the biggest pushback you get, which they read off the internet, and you know everything on the internet is true, is the part where, okay, I cannot do cruciferous vegetables, I can't do greens because it cannot.
Not true.
Okay, and exactly. So this is probably one of the biggest myths that needs to be broken down. In fact, if there's anything I tell my patients, you gotta have cruciferous vegetables. It's a completely different. It was one case study which was completely blown out of proportion, and it was not normal. But having that green juice is such a crucial part of the gut recovery as well as your thyroid recovery. And as far as thyroid support goes, again, whatever we discuss here is not medical advice. This is information that you should be asking somebody who is taking care of you, so they can give you their recommendations and what you should be doing. What is a good thyroid support? What does it have? And those are the things that will help you move forward, at least take that first step. Now, is there anything else that I should have asked you, McCall, that I haven't asked you?
So, you know, let's see. So I should say, you know, my whole motto with thyroid is, if you have a thyroid disorder, don't stop pursuing, you know, the finish of your treatment and your healing until you don't have symptoms anymore. You know, part of my mission at Thyroid Nation is to pull back the curtain and give people as many resources as possible, as much information as possible, so that you can digest that and help understand more, so that you can learn more, bring more information to your doctor if you need to, and advocate for yourself. So you can, you know, I'll tell them a little bit about the thyroid lab guide, but I did a tiny little ebook that tells you what labs you really do need, and then where the ranges are that I put my patients in, so that you guys can get your labs and then see if you're in the proper range. So that's really useful information to see, are your labs really normal, or are they in fact outside of normal where you should and likely will have symptoms?
Yeah, and one of the best things about a conversation like this and you being empowered with this knowledge is that, remember, it's your health. You have to be the leader of your specific care. When you go to the doctor is the leader of the disease management, the specific condition. They know better, at least we hope they know a little better about it. But you, as far as your healthcare goes, it's fine and it's okay and it's perfect for you to actually go in and say, would you mind running these tests? And I'd like to be in the normal range. If not, please help me get there. And I think more and more doctors are open to this kind of a conversation. And if you don't, there are a lot of us out there who can actually help you get there. So,
agreed.
And what is the gift that you have with listeners who are, who have sat through this conversation and say, okay, I really want to know what I should do?
Yes. So you can go to thyroidnation.com/gift, and you can download my thyroid lab guide. It will tell you what labs you need and what they mean. So you will get access to completely the same information that I share with my patients all day, every day. You will know exactly where my goal is to get my patients when I treat them at Modern Thyroid Clinic, in the ranges that I get them in, where they get their life back. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this and that you find healing. And you absolutely are incredible for putting this on. Fatigue is near and dear to my heart, and I know how much people need this information.
Yep. And thank you so much for being a part of this, because this was a very valuable conversation. It was very clear. The message was very clear. And I think a lot of people, I really would encourage you to go to the thyroidnation.com/gift, download that, so you can have this productive conversation with your practitioner. Otherwise, you always know how to reach out to somebody who can help you through this process. Thank you very much, McCall. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.